So you want to play guitar, but you're not sure where to start. Well, not to worry. Not only will I tell you everything you need to know, I'll also tell you the stuff behind the scenes that a normal influencer trying to sell you something wouldn't tell you. So the chances are you probably have a favorite band or a favorite guitar player, or at the very least, a guitar sound you have in your head that made you want to play the guitar in the first place. So before we even talk about guitars, the thing you need to know is that about 70 to 80% of your sound comes from your amp and your speaker cabinet. And just in case you need some clarification, here's an amp head, and here's a speaker cabinet. And if you don't believe me that most of your tone comes from your amp and your speaker cabinet, let's do a quick tone test. You're going to see a $200 guitar versus an $1,800 guitar. So before we get into this tone test, let's peel back the first behind the scenes thing that a beginning guitar player might not realize. Most guitar videos showcasing tone will mic up the speaker cabinet. So in other words, they'll take a microphone, put it right up against the speaker, and run that into their recording software. Once recorded into their software, they'll be able to EQ it and add any additional effects they want to. You can hear a very distinct difference when someone just sets up their cell phone and uses that mic versus miking up the cabinet. So here's what the guitar sounds like using the cell phone mic. And here's what it sounds like when you mic up the cabinet and put it through your recording software. So now that you know the difference between using a cell phone mic and miking up the cabinet, let's get to that tone test. Here's the $200 guitar. And here's the $1,800 guitar. So there was definitely a little bit of a sound difference, but did you hear a $1,600 sound difference? So now that you know how important amps are, let's talk about them a little further. As far as basics go, there's two main types of amps. That being said, we're going to start with the more expensive setup and work our way backwards. So if you look over my left shoulder, you'll see the orange amp head. You plug your guitar directly into the amp head, and there's a second wire behind it plugging directly into the speaker cabinet. The amp head gets plugged into the wall, and that's what powers up your speakers. There's countless different combinations when we talk about amp heads and speaker cabinets that pair well together. So let's take a step backwards, being that this is a video about beginning guitar. The second option, and more often than not, the first amp a beginning guitar player will get, is called a combo amp. Essentially, it's the head and the speaker cabinet built into one unit. You plug your guitar into here and use these knobs to adjust the settings. The thing about combo amps is, for the most part, especially if you play metal, they're not loud enough to play with a live drummer. And the reason I mention metal specifically is because most metal drummers hit the drums with a lot of force. As for this specific amp, it does get kind of close because it has one 12-inch speaker and I think 75 watts. That being said, if I crank the volume and elevate this amp a little bit, you can definitely hear it over the drums. But it's definitely pushing the limits. So now that you know the difference between a mic'd up amp and using your cell phone mic, let's mic this amp up and see how it sounds. last thing we have to cover before we jump into guitars are these: distortion and other effects pedals. Now you might think to get that heavy metal hard rock distortion sound, you need a distortion pedal. What you might not realize is most amps have a built-in distortion, and the sound of that amp's built-in distortion is how a guitar player chooses the amp they want. So are distortion pedals awesome? Yes, absolutely. But do you need them for that tone? No, not necessarily. Especially if you have a high-quality amp. That being said, distortion pedals aren't the only effects pedals that guitar players use. Just to name a few of the more popular effects like reverb, chorus, or flanger. And even though high-quality amps have their own built-in distortion, they typically don't come with those other effects. Sometimes reverb, but that's about it. Unless, of course, you buy an amp that already has those effects built in, like this Line 6 Spider. Not only does it have its own distortion, it has a multitude of different effects built right in. The convenient part about having the effects in pedal form, though, is you can turn the effect on and off by stepping on the pedal. So let's say you want the chorus effect during your intro only. Stepping on the pedal allows you to seamlessly transition to the rest of the song without having to come back to your amp and change the settings. Assuming, of course, you have an amp with built-in sound effects. I love my guitar pedals, but when you're just starting out, an amp that has those effects built in is definitely worth your while. Congratulations, you made it to the part of the video where we finally start talking about guitars. So before we start talking about budget and brand, let's start with something simple, like the guitar shape. Starting off with two of the most popular shapes. The Strat style guitar, emulated after the Fender Stratocaster. Made popular by guitar players like Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, and so on. The next shape is the single cut guitar, emulated after the Gibson Les Paul. Made famous by guitar players like Jimmy Page and Slash. The next shape up is the Telecaster shape, emulated after the Fender Telecaster. Made famous by Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. And the shape of this guitar right here is the SG shape. You might have seen guitar players like Tony Iommi and Angus Young use this style. You have the Flying V shape, made famous by guitar players like Dave Mustaine. Or you have the Gibson Explorer shape, made famous by guitar players like James Hetfield. The next shape up is the Super Strat, made famous by Eddie Van Halen. It looks similar to the Stratocaster, only this one is super. And now on to my favorite, X-shaped guitars or star-shaped guitars. There's a lot of cool variations of these, so I'll show you another set. X-shaped guitars are clearly my favorite, and if you know anything about metal, you know who played this style of guitar. So now that you saw an array of different guitar shapes, which one do you like the best? The good news is you can find a guitar in any shape you like, from a budget tier all the way up to the professional tiers. And in case it wasn't obvious, the professional tiers are typically more expensive. So with so many options, how does one make the right choice? Well, believe it or not, the budget tier actually has sub-tiers. This guitar by Galeri looks awesome. I'm a huge fan of skulls, so I had to get it. So if you're buying a guitar that's under $100, I would consider that the first tier of the budget tiers. The silver guitar to my left is also considered a budget guitar, coming in just under $200. However, there's a significant difference in quality between the two. If we turn the guitars around, I can show you the most obvious. If you can't tell by looks alone, this guitar right here has a roasted maple neck. It has a much better feel on the fingers than this guitar. On the back of the tuners, you'll see these little knobs right here. That's because this guitar right here has locking tuners. Those two specs are significant upgrades when compared to this guitar. So even though they're both considered budget tier, this one is significantly better. Well, you might be thinking, so that's an easy decision. The $200 guitar is clearly the guitar to get. And I would agree with you, except for this one instance. If you're a parent or a grandparent looking to buy a first guitar for someone younger, you might want to consider the one under $100. If you think there's a chance that the guitar is something they won't be interested in 6 months from now, $90 isn't a bad price point to entry. If it turns out they like the guitar and want to pursue it, you can probably sell that old guitar for $40-50 used and put it towards a new upgrade. So even though the $200 guitar would be my personal preference, there are some times where the $89 guitar would be more appropriate. So now that you know all that, you might be wondering, why not just get the $200+ guitar and be done with it? Especially if they have those cool features that I was mentioning. Well, even the really good budget guitars do have some flaws. Even if you're picking one of the better budget brands like Firefly, Harley Benton, or Westcreek. They have to cut costs somewhere, and usually it's in the form of the pickups. Electric guitars have pickups, which you can see right here. They're used to pick up the sound of the vibrating string. The issue that you'll find with most budget guitars is that the pickups aren't the best. Some are certainly way better than others, but as someone that buys budget guitars with frequency, and often looking through the comments section, you can see that the pickups tend to be the number one issue. So now what? Well, if you know how to use a soldering iron, you can upgrade the pickups yourself. If you take a look at this guitar right here, you can see the bridge pickup has been upgraded to an EMG. EMG is one of the top pickup brands for metal guitarists, and they often come stock in the high-end guitars. If you notice the Kirk Hammett and the Slayer LTD over my left shoulder, they both have EMGs in them. They cost about $100 each, but they make a world of difference. This guitar right here was a signature guitar for Kerry King, the guitar player of Slayer. However, this specific guitar was only the entry-level model, costing about $299 brand new. So even though I spent 1/3 of the price of the guitar on a pickup upgrade, this guitar sounds way better than any other guitar I've played for $399. Getting a budget guitar and upgrading the pickups is definitely a great way to get an awesome guitar without spending a lot of money. Now you might be wondering, if that's the case, why would anyone spend thousands on a guitar when you can just upgrade the pickups of a budget guitar? Well, the simple answer is feel and playability. It's also a good indicator of their quality assurance. So for example, this Jackson guitar is from their JS line, which is their budget line. I have several Jacksons from the JS line, and this is the only one with the issue I'm about to tell you. Running my fingers down the bottom of the neck, like this, is like running my fingers down a cheese grater. The fret ends stick out, and they're sharp. You might even be able to hear it on the mic. So even though this is my only Jackson with the sharp fret edges, it definitely makes it hard to play. And like I said earlier, my other budget guitars from the Jackson JS line are just fine. But quality assurance issues like this are way more frequent on budget lines of guitars compared to the upper tiers. But it's more than just quality assurance, it's also the quality of the parts used to build the guitar. Down here you have a Floyd Rose type tremolo system. This is what helps to keep the guitar in tune when you're using the whammy bar. The Jackson JS line uses their own Jackson by Floyd Rose as opposed to an actual Floyd Rose. Needless to say, an actual Floyd Rose is significantly more expensive, but it also helps keep the guitar in tune significantly better. So if you're ever at Guitar Center and pick up one of the more expensive guitars, you can definitely feel the difference. The real question you have to ask yourself is, do you feel a $1,000 difference? Because more often than not, that's not the case. So now that we know all about budget guitars and the differences between them and more expensive models, there's just one last thing to talk about, and that's used guitars. If you're patient and know how to negotiate, you can find some real gems on the used market, especially on Facebook Marketplace. Brand new, both of these guitars cost about $800 each. As you can see, they both come stock with EMG pickups. However, on the used market, with some patience and some good negotiating skills, I was able to get these for $300 each. So what's better than a budget guitar with a pickup upgrade? A used $800 guitar for the same price. I can't recommend the used market enough. I'd say about 75% of my equipment is used. So unless you live in a desolate area where the nearest musician is 800 miles away, definitely take a look on the used market first. So let's wrap this video up with some tone tests. As I mentioned earlier, my 3 favorite budget guitar brands are Firefly, Harley Benton, and Westcreek. For this tone test, I'm going to be plugging into my... That head is going to be plugged into my Randall KH4x12 behind me. I'm going to be miking up the speaker cabinet and putting it into my recording software. However, I won't be using any additional effects, that way you can hear the guitar sound as close to as natural as possible. So that's going to do it for this one. I really appreciate you stopping by. I hope this video helped make things a little bit easier when you're looking to buy your first guitar. If you happen to be a fan of guitars, gear, metal, and all-around awesomeness, hit that subscribe button. Anyway, thanks again for hanging out with me. I'm the Tatted Ball Guy reminding you, good music makes your head nod. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.